Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Broadband News. So we were kind of expecting some delays to the Bead program from the new administration coming in, and specifically what Howard Lutnick had been talking about as far as a rigorous review of the program. And we now have confirmation of that from a post that the State of Maine did. And then I also got some confirmation from the state of Georgia, because I'm tracking something with Georgia as well. Be right back. We'll talk about that. Hey, Rick Husey here with Z-Corn with Broadband News. So, as I said, we're kind of expecting this. I still don't think that the NTIA is going to be able to monkey with this program too much, because the states want to move on with this, and that's every state. This is not a partisan issue at this point. Of course, any spending back during the Biden administration was a partisan issue, but a lot of the Trump administration, when they came in, a lot of what was put on hold immediately was a lot of the stuff that was called the Inflation Reduction Act, which had nothing to do with inflation reduction. It was really the Green New Deal kind of packaged as inflation reduction. It actually increased inflation. So a lot of that was put on hold, but also the Bead program. Howard Lutnick was making noise before he was confirmed, and even during his hearing, and now after he was confirmed, he said he wants to do some rigorous review on the Bead program. And he was talking about, wow, we could do satellite everywhere, and it would cost a lot less. So I've been talking about how the fact that would be a terrible idea. I think the states believe that would be a terrible idea. And the states, again, this is all states, Republican, red states, blue states, because now that the money's been allocated, Republican states, they want to get that money to be able to improve broadband in their state. And the states have been through a multi-year process of getting all of this going. There were lots of delays. Some of the delays had to do with the fact that we needed, as part of the legislation, we needed to have good broadband maps, which, frankly, were needed. We didn't have good maps. Everything was by census block. So we really had no idea, number one, which locations in the United States needed broadband, and then secondly, which locations had broadband. So those are two things you need to know before you can fund broadband to every unserved location, unserved and underserved location. So we needed to get that done. There were some delays because of a challenge that was made to the company that eventually won the broadband fabric contract, which was basically to then figure out where all of the locations are that need broadband, and then the broadband operators needed to go in and figure out how to load their data on everywhere where they did serve someone, so that we could get that final FCC broadband map that was correct. So that took a long time. Like I said, there was a challenge that kind of drug that out a little bit. And there were some things in the, frankly, in the original legislation, not so much in the legislation, there was some things in there, but there were some things in the notice of funding opportunity under the Biden administration that were really on the edges of broadband or not at all related to broadband. So those are some things that I could see Howard Lutnick and his team at his new team at Commerce going in and saying, this was not in the original legislation. We're not going to require this. And I think in that case, a lot of states might be happy. They might think, oh, well, we had to do all this work before to kind of figure out how to do this, but now it doesn't need to be implemented. I think the internet service providers that would be the subgrantees will be happy about that, because now it will be easier for them to come in and provide the service if they don't have to jump through a lot of regulatory hoops about environmental things and workforce requirements that are kind of onerous, those kinds of things. So those are all good things. But what would be bad would be saying that fiber should not be a preference in this. And if you read the legislation, and I've been through this in a couple of previous videos, fiber is definitely a preference. And if you read through it, satellite is not a replacement for fiber, because satellite is not considered reliable broadband service based on the legislation. If you read the legislation the way you should, which would be the way they intended it, and if you went to Congress, if you could go to Congress and say, what did you intend? I'm sure they would agree that they want fiber as much as possible. They don't want satellite to be considered unless it's not possible to do fiber. And in that case, fixed wireless that is unlicensed and satellite can be considered as alternate technologies. And states are doing that, including Maine, who we're going to read about here. States were saying, there's some areas that are just too expensive for fiber, and we think satellite is a good choice. So they were already doing this prior to Howard Lutnick coming in. So you see here, Maine's Bead plan delayed, triggered by NTIA's new policy direction. This is in Broadband Breakfast. NTIA is expected to issue revised BEAD guidance in mid-May, Maine says. This is the Maine Broadband Office folks here. Maine will likely miss its June 12 final proposal deadline under the $42.45 billion BEAD program. State officials acknowledged this week, citing a pending federal policy rewrite that has effectively paused progress. So maybe what they're saying there is they got their initial stuff in June a year ago, because there was a year where states had to get their final proposal in. So maybe that's the case, or maybe they're just saying that was their internal goal, but they may be saying that was what they were required to do. But of course, if the Commerce Department put a hold on things, they can't really be held responsible for that. So I'm sure there'll be some grace there on getting that in on time. But they basically said their schedule is shifting. In a notice sent to stakeholders late Wednesday, Maine Connectivity Authority Chief Operating Officer Brian Allenby said that the program's administrator, the NTIA, has halted key procedural meetings with the state required to move forward with BEAD implementation. Late last week, NTIA confirmed that anticipated updates to the BEAD program will make it infeasible for MCA to complete the program requirements in the previously defined time frame. The news from NTIA left the state in the dark on key issues. An updated policy notice is currently expected from NTIA in mid-May, although the final timing and the scope of the program changes under the notice are still to be determined, he said. And we actually are working with a city in the state of Georgia that is looking at providing broadband for their entire county. They provide broadband to a lot of the county right now, but they're looking to fill in the gaps where they don't. And in Georgia, actually, you have to, in the first round, you had to bid to do the whole county. So they're in a really good position to do that. So they've been waiting. They're really ready to go. They want to go. They've been waiting. And originally, when I was checking in with the broadband office, I was told it was going to be April when they made those preliminary awards. And I think the city that we're working with has a really good shot at getting funding because, again, they're in a perfect position to do it, already providing broadband to much of the county. And they're a city which, that's part of the BEAD program was they wanted cities and co-ops and those kinds of folks to be able to participate if they could, considered nonprofit, so to speak. Again, they're in a good position, but they really want to get started. And, they can't now. And when I did check in with the broadband office, I was told something similar. I was told that they're having to push the initial announcements of the initial preliminary awards out to May. And hopefully that will be the case unless there's some new guidance from the NTIA that will require them to make some changes. Hopefully there won't be. Georgia's final proposal looked pretty solid. And again, I think it's going to be hard for Howard Lutnick and the Commerce Department to make too many major changes that would impact a state other than, again, relieving some of the regulatory burden, because I don't think they can come in and say, you have to, you've got too much fiber. You got to use something else like satellite that's cheaper. The states aren't going to want to do that. Georgia's a red state. They're not going to want to do that. They're going to want to maximize fiber because, as I've talked about in previous videos, if you say somebody's going to get satellite, you're just going to have to build fiber out to them sometime in the next 5 to 10 years because the way things are going as far as the amount of data, fiber can expand out to 25 gigs today. Satellite, you're lucky if you get a gig. A gig symmetrical these days is good. You can't do a gig symmetrical on satellite. You don't need a gig symmetrical most of the time. You don't need that gig up speed, but still, you're going to start to need more upstream speeds, and you're going to start to definitely need more downstream speeds as we move on down the years. We don't want to be paying to give people satellite now and then having to pay again to give them fiber. Terrible idea. I don't think they're going to do it. It would be really stupid, so we'll have to see what happens there. Maine isn't the first state to adjust course. West Virginia recently secured a 3-month extension on its BEAD final proposal after Governor Patrick Morrisey, he's a Republican, met with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. But while West Virginia's delay appeared voluntary, framed as a strategic move to give the state time to revise its plan in light of the Trump administration's new emphasis on tech neutrality and cost efficiency, Maine's pause has been forced by a freeze and guidance from NTIA. So it sounds like they're trying to, they met, and maybe they're trying to make it more tech neutral. But again, most states, what they're trying to do is fiber first, and then where they can't afford fiber to do the other technologies, and that's the way it should be handled. The shift in the Bead's program, or the Bead program's direction under the Trump administration, has sparked growing resistance across the country. In recent weeks, broadband officials in Maine and Minnesota have sent letters urging the Commerce Department not to upend years of planning, and it is years of planning. The states offered detailed recommendations to improve the Bead program without delaying it, and emphasized that broadband deployment should remain grounded in local expertise. And that's true. And that's one of the good things about the Bead program, and was one of the issues with some prior broadband funding, was that the states are the ones that are getting the funds, and then they're determining how the funds would be best spent. And that makes sense. And that should be what the Trump administration wants to do. The Trump administration, being a Republican administration, a conservative administration, believes in sending stuff back to the states, which is why they're doing things like saying, we want to get rid of the Department of Education and just send the money to the state. Because really, the Department of Education doesn't do much. They basically just move money around, right? So they're saying, why don't we just send it directly to the states rather than having to go through this big bureaucracy that we're all paying taxes for, and send the money to the states. And the states know best how to do something with that money. And it's the same with broadband. The states know best how to use that money to effectively reach all of their citizens. They urge caution. The health, safety, education, and economic success of our communities depend on these programs. We ask that you tread cautiously when changing them. The delay in Maine puts one of Bead's most advanced state programs on hold. MCA just wrapped its project application process, receiving applications for 385 project areas, covering 79% of eligible locations in the state. MCA noted a highly competitive process with 70% of areas receiving multiple bids. So I'm not sure, 79% doesn't seem like you're covering much of the eligible locations. I'm assuming those are unserved eligible locations. So it seems like they should be close to 100% on their final. Applicants pledged to cover 39% of project costs with private funds, resulting in an average subsidy of under $5,000 per location. That is great. Under $5,000 per location average. And then 39%, so I'm assuming that's talking about the match when they say pledging to cover 39% of the cost. So, and the 25% is the match requirement, so they're well over the 25%. More than 90% of applications committed to finishing projects within 2 years of permitting. The state planned to use alternative technology options like low Earth orbit satellites and fixed wireless to fill in remaining coverage areas. So the LEO satellites, that would be Starlink, and possibly, if they can get everything going in time, Amazon Kuiper is another player in the satellite business, although they are just now, I think they maybe have one satellite up, I think. So they've got a long way to go, but it's possible that they might be able to do something on this. So that there, it tells you Maine had already, and I remember seeing that in their one of their proposals, that they were looking or they were already arranging for satellite coverage. This was prior to Howard Lutnick ever getting involved in any of this. NTIA's changes to the program guidelines could have significant downstream impact on our ISP partners and the communities they're planning to serve. While we wait to inform applicants of the specifics of those changes, we cannot simultaneously proceed with detailed, good faith negotiations at this time. As a result, we are matching the pace being set. Maine's future progress depends on the details and the final instructions handed down by NTIA. We'll begin initial conversations with applicants this week, using the opportunity to compile as much information as possible and prepare to implement updated NTIA requirements as soon as they are communicated, Allenby said. So there you go. So I linked to this article in Broadband Breakfast. There's a link here to where a lot of this information came from on the MCA, Maine Connectivity Authority site. You can see here that's what that was from, and just a link in general to the Bead page as well, the main Bead page, if you want to check that out. And here you see the timeline. So their initial proposal, volume 1 and 2, were submitted in December of 2023. Here you go. Yeah, so I think this is the timeline. So their initial proposal, volume 2, was approved by NTI in June 2024. And once that's approved, I believe, if I recall the timeline, the Bead timeline, the deadline to get their final proposal in would be a year after they get their initial proposal, volume 2, approved. So that's why they're saying we're not going to make the NTIA's deadline, but it's the NTIA's fault. So the NTIA needs to, like I said, give them a little grace on that. So you see their plan was to have their final proposal submitted to NTIA in spring of 2025. So that would be around now. I guess once you get into June, obviously you're talking about summer, and this is right here is where they're not going to make it if the NTIA does not get on the ball and figure out what they're doing here. So, and they need to do that. Again, as I mentioned, I've talked to the state of Georgia, so I'm hearing similar things from them. Now, one thing I do know about, just the fact that we're working with this county here in the state of Georgia, is that the state had come back to the county and said, "Hey, we got a few questions." So there were still things going on. So even though the Trump administration had come in and we knew there was kind of uncertainty, I think the state of Georgia was just proceeding as they could, as much as they could, doing everything they could to get the applications reviewed and processed and figuring out what needed to be addressed or what questions they had. And then every state is going to get to a point, just like Maine did, where they're going to say, you know what, we can't really go any further until we hear further from the NTIA on what their plans are. And again, what this article said, and based on the timing that I heard back from the broadband office in the state of Georgia, it looks like it's going to be May, and according to this article, mid-May, before the Commerce Department releases their updated guidance on beads. So we all can wait. We're mid-April now, so we all can wait, I guess, another month to figure what's going on here. And again, I'm hoping that as they review this, and I understand a new administration coming in and having to review, but I don't like the fact that they're coming in and wanting to tear it all apart where in places where it doesn't make sense. So again, I'm hoping that they're getting good guidance from people that actually know about broadband, that know about know about fiber and what it can do today, know about satellite and what it can do today, and realize that you don't want to be funding something that's going to be a short-term fix. There's no reason to do a short-term fix when you've got the funding already approved for a long-term fix for, in some states, every single location. In other states, many, if not most locations. And in some states, it's going to be a little more difficult, and they're going to have to rely a little bit more heavily on alternative technologies. But it's in the notice of funding opportunity, the prior notice of funding opportunity for BEAD, that you can use that alternative technology. So it's not like states are going to be wanting to waste money. They're just wanting to put the money to its best use to be able to cover as many of their citizens as they can that are unserved and underserved with a technology that's going to go far into the future, not something that would be a short-term fix. They're only going to do alternative technologies where they absolutely have to, where it's a ridiculous price to be able to do fiber, and there's going to be situations like that because there are some places that fiber is just too expensive. So they'll have to address those few areas that are left over later. Appreciate you joining me today. Thanks a lot. If this was interesting or helpful, if you would give me a thumbs up, I would appreciate that. If you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button, ring the bell to make sure you're notified when I'm live, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.